It was supposed to be another routine political debate on national television. Nobody expected what would happen when conservative commentator Charlie Kirk faced off with Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett on that Thursday evening broadcast. The studio lights were bright, the moderator was prepared with standard questions about policy differences, and millions of Americans had tuned in for what they thought would be typical political theater. But then, without warning, Kirk's face reddened as he suddenly abandoned all pretense of debate decorum. His voice escalated to a full-throated scream as he jabbed his finger toward Representative Crockett, accusing her of undermining American values and deliberately misleading voters about constitutional principles. The moderator's eyes widened. The camera operator zoomed in on Crockett's face, expecting to capture a moment of shock or intimidation. Instead, what happened next left the entire studio in stunned silence. With remarkable composure, Jasmine Crockett slowly reached into her portfolio, removed a single document, and placed it deliberately on the table before her. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't match Kirk's emotional intensity. She simply looked directly into the camera and said 11 words that would be replayed millions of times across the globe within hours. "I don't debate emotions. I debate facts. And here are yours, sir." What followed wasn't just a response. It was a masterclass in political confrontation that would reshape public discourse about how truth functions in American democracy. If you appreciate seeing powerful moments of accountability like this, make sure to like and subscribe for more videos that cut through the noise and reveal the truth behind political theater. Before this explosive confrontation captured the nation's attention, Jasmine Crockett had built a reputation as a formidable legal mind with a disciplined approach to political debate. A former criminal defense attorney with over 15 years of courtroom experience, Crockett had developed a methodical style that relied on meticulous preparation, rather than rhetorical flourishes. She brings a prosecutor's precision to every conversation, noted political analyst Eleanor Simmons in a profile published just weeks before the debate. While others might go for the emotional appeal, Crockett consistently builds cases brick by brick with evidence. The debate had been scheduled as part of a special series on constitutional interpretation hosted by National Forum, a program known for featuring voices across the political spectrum. Crockett, serving her second term in Congress and sitting on the House Judiciary Committee, had been invited to represent the progressive perspective on executive power limitations. Charlie Kirk, founder of Turning Point USA and a popular conservative voice among younger Republicans, had built his career through confrontational debates and provocative statements that often generated viral clips online. His debating style typically relied on overwhelming opponents with rapid-fire assertions and emotional appeals to traditional values. Kirk's approach works because he doesn't get bogged down in technical details. Conservative commentator Michael Wellman had observed in a podcast earlier that year. He speaks directly to viewers' core beliefs about what America should be. The producers had anticipated a spirited exchange of ideas. Both participants had agreed to standard debate protocols, including timed responses and a prohibition against interrupting while the other speaker had the floor. The moderator, respected journalist Rebecca Holloway, had a reputation for maintaining control even during heated exchanges. Behind the scenes, Crockett's preparation had been characteristically thorough. Her chief legislative aide, Marcus Washington, had assembled a comprehensive briefing book containing Kirk's previous statements on executive power, relevant Supreme Court decisions, and statistical data on related congressional actions. For 3 evenings leading up to the debate, Crockett had conducted practice sessions, anticipating likely arguments and preparing evidence-based responses. She wasn't preparing for a fight, Washington later told reporters. She was preparing for a fact-based discussion about constitutional principles. Kirk's approach to preparation had been more focused on identifying emotional pressure points. His team had compiled clips of Crockett's previous media appearances, looking for moments where she had made statements that might contradict each other or appear to undermine traditional interpretations of executive authority. The stage was set for what producers hoped would be compelling television, a clash between two distinct political communication styles representing broader divides in American discourse. What no one anticipated was how quickly and dramatically those different approaches would collide, nor how Crockett's response would resonate far beyond the political sphere. As viewers settled in for what seemed like a typical political debate, they had no idea they were about to witness a moment that would be studied in communication classes and political science courses for years to come. The debate began cordially enough. The first 15 minutes featured structured exchanges about the constitutional limits on executive orders, with both participants adhering to the agreed-upon format. Kirk presented arguments for expansive executive authority during national emergencies, while Crockett countered with historical examples of judicial constraints on such powers. The turning point came during a discussion about a recent Supreme Court decision limiting certain presidential actions taken without congressional approval. Kirk had just finished criticizing the ruling when moderator Rebecca Holloway directed a follow-up question to Crockett. Representative Crockett, you've expressed support for this decision, but critics suggest this position contradicts statements you made during the previous administration. How do you respond? Crockett began her answer methodically. The principle remains consistent. No president, regardless of party, should circumvent explicit congressional, Kirk interrupted, breaking protocol. That's absolutely false, and you know it. His voice rose slightly as he continued without waiting for the moderator to intervene. When President Harrison took similar actions in 2021, you called it necessary leadership in your press release. Crockett turned toward Kirk, her expression calm. If you'll allow me to finish, I'd like to clarify the significant legal differences between those situations. The only difference is partisan politics, Kirk pressed, speaking more rapidly. You supported executive overreach when your party did it, and now you're attacking the same actions when they come from the other side. The moderator attempted to regain control. Mr. Kirk, please allow Representative Crockett to complete her response. But Kirk continued, his voice growing louder. The American people deserve the truth about this hypocrisy. You can't claim to defend the Constitution when you selectively apply its principles. Crockett remained composed, waiting for the interruption to end. This seemed to further agitate Kirk, whose face had begun to redden noticeably. This is exactly what's wrong with Washington, he continued, his voice now approaching a shout. Career politicians who twist the Constitution to fit whatever's politically convenient at the moment. The studio grew tense. Camera operators exchanged glances as Kirk's volume continued to increase. The moderator tried again. Mr. Kirk, we agreed to certain rules of... Rules? Kirk was now fully shouting, standing slightly from his chair as he gestured forcefully toward Crockett. She doesn't care about rules. She's part of the elite that thinks the Constitution is just a suggestion. The outburst seemed to surprise even members of Kirk's own team visible at the edge of the set. The producer made a cutting motion, signaling for a commercial break, but the cameras continued rolling. Kirk's voice echoed through the studio as he continued his tirade. The American people are tired of being lied to. You stand there with your fancy law degree and think you can fool everyday citizens. Throughout this escalation, Crockett hadn't moved. She hadn't attempted to interrupt or match Kirk's emotional intensity. She simply watched him, her expression revealing nothing beyond patient attention. When Kirk finally paused for breath, the studio fell into an uncomfortable silence. The moderator, clearly flustered, began to speak. Perhaps we should take a moment to... May I respond now? Crockett asked quietly. The calm in her voice created an immediate contrast that was impossible to ignore. The moderator nodded, relief evident in her expression. Crockett straightened the papers before her and looked directly at Kirk. First, I want to thank Mr. Kirk for his passionate engagement with these important issues. Emotional investment in our democracy is something we should all share. The measured tone of her response seemed to momentarily confuse Kirk, who had been prepared for a counterattack. Now, regarding the specific claim about my position on President Harrison's executive actions, she continued, opening a folder before her. I believe Mr. Kirk is referring to the National Infrastructure Emergency Declaration of March 2021. She removed a document and placed it on the table. This is my complete statement from that time, not just the partial quote that's been circulating. I said, and I quote, while emergency leadership is necessary to address the infrastructure crisis, Any executive action must ultimately conform to constitutional constraints and should be temporary pending proper congressional authorization. Kirk started to interrupt again, but Crockett raised her hand slightly. If I may finish, please. I believe in consistency on these matters. She produced a second document. This is my legal analysis submitted to the Judiciary Committee last year regarding the current administration's executive orders. Page 3, paragraph 2 states my position clearly. Emergency powers, while sometimes necessary, must be limited in scope, duration, and must not circumvent explicit congressional authority regardless of which party occupies the White House. The studio remained silent as Crockett methodically addressed each of Kirk's allegations with documented evidence. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't attack his character. She simply presented facts, one after another, each directly contradicting the narrative he had been shouting moments before. As for my fancy law degree, she said with the slightest smile, I'm certainly grateful for my education, but I believe it's my experience representing everyday Americans in courtrooms across this country that informs my understanding of constitutional protections. Before entering Congress, I defended citizens who couldn't afford expensive attorneys, people who needed the Constitution's protections most desperately. Kirk shifted uncomfortably in his seat as Crockett continued her methodical response. When she finished addressing his specific claims, she looked directly at the camera rather than at Kirk. The Constitution isn't a partisan document. It doesn't belong to any political party. It belongs to the American people. And honest debate about its interpretation requires that we engage with facts, history, and legal precedent, not just with the volume of our voices. The contrast between Kirk's emotional outburst and Crockett's composed, evidence-based response created a visual and rhetorical juxtaposition that would soon become the central focus of media coverage about the debate. The moments following Crockett's measured response revealed a shifting dynamic that no one had anticipated at the debate's outset. Kirk, who had built his reputation on dominating exchanges through forceful rhetoric, found himself in unfamiliar territory, faced with the opponent who refused to be drawn into an emotional confrontation and instead redirected the conversation to verifiable evidence. That's taking my criticism out of context, Kirk attempted, his voice noticeably lower than during his previous outburst. The point isn't about specific statements, but the overall pattern of, perhaps we could address the specific pattern, Crockett suggested, her tone remaining conversational. I've brought the voting records and public statements from both administrations. Would you like to examine them together? The camera caught Kirk glancing towards someone off stage, presumably a member of his team. For several seconds, the studio remained in uncomfortable silence. Moderator Rebecca Holloway, recognizing the moment's significance, made a pivotal decision. Rather than moving to a new topic as originally planned, she said, I think viewers would benefit from exploring this further. Representative Crockett has presented specific documentation regarding her consistent position. Mr. Kirk, would you like to present evidence of the inconsistency you've alleged? This direct invitation to provide substantiating evidence created a visible turning point. Kirk reached for his portfolio but then withdrew his hand. The American people don't need more papers and legal jargon, he said, attempting to pivot. They know political doublespeak when they hear it. Crockett's response was immediate but measured. I agree completely that Americans can recognize political doublespeak. That's precisely why I believe in letting them see the actual records, rather than asking them to rely on characterizations. She turned toward the moderator. Ms. Holloway, I've provided copies of all relevant documents for fact-checking purposes. I'm happy to have the network verify each citation independently, this moment, offering independent verification rather than expecting viewers to simply accept her word would later be identified by media analysts as the decisive turning point in public perception of the exchange. Kirk, realizing the conversation had moved firmly onto factual ground where emotional appeals held less sway, attempted to redirect. The larger issue here is about respect for American traditions and values, which progressive policies consistently undermine. Crockett nodded thoughtfully. Values and traditions are indeed essential. The American tradition I'm most committed to is the one where we can disagree vigorously while maintaining respect for evidence, truth, and each other's dignity. That tradition dates back to our founding documents. The studio audience, which had remained silent throughout the heated exchange per network rules, suddenly erupted in spontaneous applause. The show's director, caught off guard by this breach of protocol, didn't immediately signal for silence. For a moment, Kirk appeared genuinely stunned by the audience reaction. His expression, captured in a tight camera shot that would later be shared millions of times online, revealed a dawning recognition that the exchange had not gone as he had anticipated. As the applause subsided, Crockett addressed Kirk directly for the first time since his outburst. "Mr. Kirk, I don't believe either of us is served by questioning each other's patriotism or commitment to this country. We have different visions for America's future, certainly. But I'd like to think we both want what's best for our nation, even when we disagree about what that looks like." This gesture of professional respect, offered after Kirk's personal attacks, created yet another powerful contrast that viewers immediately recognized. Social media platforms began lighting up with comments and video clips, even before the segment concluded. The moderator, recognizing the significance of what was unfolding, made another crucial decision. "We're going to take a short break," she announced. "When we return, I'd like to reset our discussion with a focus on the substantive policy differences that I know both of our participants came prepared to address." As the network cut to commercial, cameras captured staff members approaching both participants. Kirk was immediately surrounded by his team, engaged in intense conversation. Crockett simply took a sip of water, reviewed her notes, and waited calmly for the segment to resume. By the time the debate concluded 40 minutes later, clips of the exchange had already been viewed millions of times across multiple platforms. Crockett composure and dumb facts not fury were trending nationally, with viewers from across the political spectrum commenting on the stark contrast in communication styles they had witnessed. What began as a shouting attack had transformed into a powerful demonstration of an alternative approach to political disagreement, one grounded in evidence, respect, and unwavering composure in the face of provocation. In the hours following the debate, the exchange between Kirk and Crockett transcended typical political coverage to become a cultural moment that resonated far beyond partisan circles. The contrasting approaches to communication, emotional intensity versus evidence-based composure, struck a chord with a public increasingly exhausted by the fractured state of political discourse. By midnight, international news organizations had picked up the story. Headlines in London, Tokyo, Berlin, and Sydney all highlighted variations of the same theme: an American political confrontation that unexpectedly transformed into a masterclass in civil communication. Video clips of the exchange, particularly Crockett's composed response to Kirk's shouting, were subtitled in dozens of languages and shared globally. Morning shows across America featured communication experts and body language analysts dissecting the interaction. Dr. Melissa Thompson, professor of political communication at Georgetown University, observed on a national broadcast, "What made this moment extraordinary wasn't just Representative Crockett's composure, but her strategic redirection from personal conflict to verifiable evidence. She effectively changed the rules of engagement." Viewers from unexpected demographics began expressing admiration for Crockett's approach. A viral TikTok from a 17-year-old in Nebraska captured the sentiment. "I don't know much about politics, but I know I want to handle pressure like she did." That's real strength. Former debate champions, military leaders, and business executives praised the tactical discipline Crockett displayed. Retired General James Whitfield commented, "What we witnessed was the communication equivalent of strategic patience, maintaining position under fire until the optimal moment to advance with precision." For Kirk, the aftermath proved challenging. Initial reactions from his core supporters defended his passionate approach, but as the exchange continued circulating, more nuanced responses emerged from conservative circles. Respected conservative commentator William Bennett noted on his radio program, "Passion has its place in political discourse, but last night reminds us that it must be tethered to substance. When emotions become a substitute for evidence, we've abandoned persuasion for performance." 3 days after the debate, polls revealed an unexpected development. Viewers across political affiliations reported finding Crockett's evidence-based approach more convincing than emotional appeals, regardless of their own political leanings. This finding contradicted conventional wisdom about the persuasive power of emotional messaging in political communication. Crockett herself maintained a measured response to her newfound viral fame. When pressed by reporters about the exchange, she consistently redirected conversation to the substantive policy issues that had been obscured by the confrontation. "The American people deserve debates focused on solutions to real problems," she said, during a brief hallway interview at the Capitol. "How we communicate with each other when we disagree isn't just about political effectiveness. It reflects our capacity to function as a democracy." Behind the scenes, a more profound impact was developing. Congressional staffers reported a surge in applications from young people citing the debate as their inspiration for pursuing public service. University debate coaches noted students specifically requesting training in the Crockett method of evidence-based response to emotional provocations. Perhaps most significantly, several politically divided communities began experimenting with new formats for local governance meetings, explicitly modeling civil discourse guidelines on the approach they had witnessed. In Lakeville, Minnesota, a town historically divided by contentious school board meetings, local leaders implemented a facts-first protocol that required all claims to be supported by verifiable evidence. "We were inspired by watching someone maintain composure while still firmly defending principles," explained Lakeville Mayor Patricia Gonzalez. "It showed us there's a more productive path through disagreement." 6 weeks after the debate, a more personal consequence emerged when Kirk addressed the exchange during a podcast appearance. In a moment of unexpected reflection, he acknowledged, "Looking back at that night, I'm not satisfied with how I represented my positions. The substance of my arguments got lost in the delivery, and that's on me. I still fundamentally disagree with Representative Crockett's policies, but I respect that she came prepared to defend her views with evidence." This acknowledgement, which itself went viral in political circles, suggested the possibility that even in an era of profound polarization, demonstrations of substantive, evidence-based discourse could influence not just public perception but also how political communicators view their own effectiveness. Communication researchers began studying what they termed the Crockett effect, the phenomenon whereby maintaining composure and redirecting emotional provocations to evidential ground could shift power dynamics in public confrontations. Preliminary findings suggested that viewers retained substantially more factual information from exchanges conducted in this manner compared to emotionally charged debates. A year after the famous exchange, a high school debate tournament in Chicago introduced the Crockett Rule, requiring participants to respond to emotional appeals exclusively with verifiable evidence. The winner, 16-year-old Amara Washington, told reporters, "I learned that the loudest voice doesn't have to win. Facts spoken clearly can be more powerful than opinions shouted forcefully." For Crockett herself, the viral moment became just one chapter in a career increasingly focused on modeling evidence-based approaches to political disagreement. When asked during a university commencement address to reflect on what she hoped would be her legacy from that exchange, she offered a response that captured why the moment had resonated so widely. "In a healthy democracy, disagreement isn't just inevitable, it's essential. The question isn't whether we'll face opposition or even hostility to our ideas. The question is whether we'll allow others to determine how we respond." That night reminded me that we always have a choice. We can mirror the emotion directed toward us, or we can transform it by responding with substance, evidence, and respect for the intelligence of those watching. What began as a standard political confrontation had evolved into something far more significant, a widely accessible demonstration that even in the most polarized environments, there remains a powerful alternative to escalation. It offered a template not just for political discourse, but for navigating disagreement in boardrooms, classrooms, and community meetings across the country. The lesson wasn't that emotion has no place in public discourse, but rather that evidence offers a steadier foundation for meaningful exchange, a lesson that continued to resonate far beyond the political arena where it first captured the world's attention. If this story resonated with you and you value seeing moments of truth and accountability, in our political discourse. Please like and subscribe to our channel. Help us continue bringing you the moments that matter most in our democracy, where substance triumphs over spectacle and facts speak louder than fury.